The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances, wrote Carl Jung. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. In this simple observation lies a profound truth about human connection that most people completely misunderstand. We spend our lives seeking meaningful relationships, yet Jung discovered that the ability to form deep, authentic bonds isn't found in social techniques or superficial charm, but in a much more counterintuitive place, the depths of our own psyche. Today, we're exploring Jung's revolutionary insight into why some people naturally form powerful connections, while others remain perpetually disconnected, despite endless efforts to connect. Jung uncovered a psychological principle so fundamental that it explains why most attempts at connection fail. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, he observed. This avoidance creates the illusion of connection while preventing its reality. The uncomfortable truth, Jung revealed, is that genuine human bonds aren't formed through the strategies most people rely on. They emerge from a radically different source that requires abandoning our most basic instincts about how relationships work. What Jung discovered about connection contradicts almost everything our culture teaches about relationships, yet it explains why the most magnetic people often break conventional social rules. This understanding transforms not just how we connect with others, but how we experience ourselves in those connections. The greatest tragedy of the family, Jung wrote, is the unlived lives of the parents. The connections we form reflect our internal relationship with ourselves, and Jung believed most people sacrifice authentic connection by hiding behind personas and projections. He discovered that unforgettable relationships become possible only when we cross a psychological threshold most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Let's explore the revolutionary insight Jung uncovered about human connection and how it might change everything about how you relate to others. Carl Gustav Jung spent his career exploring the landscapes of the human unconscious. As a psychiatrist working in the early 20th century, he witnessed firsthand how his patients struggled to form meaningful connections despite their desperate desire for them. What fascinated Jung wasn't just that these connections proved elusive, but that his patients seemed to be actively sabotaging the very thing they most wanted, often without any awareness they were doing so. This paradox led Jung to a profound realization. The quality of our connections with others is directly proportional to the connection we've established with ourselves. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart, Jung wrote. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. This awakening to our inner reality, Jung discovered, is the prerequisite for genuine connection with others, a sequence that most people try to reverse, seeking external validation before internal understanding. Jung articulated this principle directly in his clinical observations. Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, there love is lacking. The one is the shadow of the other. Here, Jung identifies a crucial distinction between connection rooted in mutual recognition versus relationships based on control, compensation, or escape from oneself. The latter might provide temporary relief from isolation, but ultimately reinforce it. To understand Jung's insight about authentic connection, we must first understand what prevents it. Jung identified a psychological structure he called the persona, the social mask we wear to gain acceptance and navigate society. The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and, on the other, to conceal the true nature of the individual. This persona isn't inherently problematic. It's a necessary adaptation to social reality. The issue arises when we mistake this mask for our authentic self, or when we become so identified with our social role that we lose access to the deeper dimensions of our being. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, Jung noted, but by integration of the contraries. Yet, integration requires acknowledging aspects of ourselves that our persona is specifically designed to hide. Here we encounter the first paradox of Jungian connection. What makes us most relatable to others isn't our polished exterior, but our willingness to acknowledge our full humanity, including the parts we'd prefer to hide. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order, Jung observed. This secret order includes the aspects of ourselves we've relegated to what Jung called the shadow, the disowned parts of our psyche that contain both our unacknowledged darkness and our unrealized potential. Everyone carries a shadow, Jung wrote, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. This shadow doesn't disappear when we deny it. It manifests in our relationships through projection, where we attribute to others what we cannot accept in ourselves. These projections create the illusion of connection, while preventing its reality. We think we're relating to another person, but we're actually interacting with portions of our own disowned psyche that we've mapped onto them. Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face, Jung remarked. This insight reveals why so many relationships follow predictable patterns of initial attraction, followed by disillusionment. The qualities that draw us to others often reflect our own unconscious needs and potentials. When these projections inevitably collapse, as reality fails to conform to our unconscious expectations, we experience the relationship as disappointing rather than recognizing the opportunity for self-knowledge it presents. True connection, Jung discovered, becomes possible only when we withdraw these projections and begin to see others as they actually are, not as carriers of our own unconscious material. To confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light, he wrote. This confrontation with our shadow, the aspects of ourselves we've denied or repressed, isn't just necessary for self-knowledge. It's the foundation for authentic relationship. Consider how most people approach connection, by presenting a carefully curated version of themselves designed to gain approval or avoid rejection. Jung would view this as fundamentally backward. The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life, he stated. Without this self-acceptance, which necessarily includes accepting the shadow, we remain incapable of accepting others in their complexity. Jung articulated this dynamic with characteristic clarity. The development of the personality means nothing less than the optimum development of the whole individual human being. This transformation isn't always comfortable. Authentic connection often activates unconscious material, bringing to the surface parts of ourselves we've spent a lifetime avoiding. This explains why many people unconsciously sabotage promising relationships just as they are beginning to deepen. The vulnerability required threatens the stability of the persona. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung acknowledged. The pain of genuine connection comes from allowing ourselves to be seen as we are, not as we pretend to be. It requires surrendering the control that our persona provides and trusting in a process that transforms both parties through honest engagement. Most people find this prospect terrifying, preferring the safety of superficial connection to the vulnerability of authentic relating. This brings us to one of Jung's most profound insights about human relationship. Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. Many people approach connection primarily through either intellectual understanding or emotional resonance, creating an artificial division that limits the depth of their relationships. Jung recognized that complete human connection engages the entire psyche, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition working in concert rather than opposition. Knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also, Jung wrote. This acceptance of imperfection, both in ourselves and in our understanding of others, creates the conditions for genuine connection. We no longer require others to conform to our idealized projections, allowing them to be as complex and contradictory as we ourselves are. This acceptance isn't resignation, but recognition, seeing clearly rather than seeing what we wish to see. Here we encounter another Jungian paradox. The more fully we accept our own individuality, the more deeply we can connect with others. The bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes, Jung observed. This isn't just a statement about mass psychology, but about the nature of authentic connection. Genuine relationship isn't found in conformity or consensus, but in the courageous expression of individual truth, a truth that resonates precisely because it emerges from the depths rather than the surface. Jung captured this in his concept of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole and distinct from collective identity. Individualism is not an obstacle to collectivity, but its fulfillment, he wrote, recognizing that our most valuable contributions to human connection come not from suppressing our uniqueness, but from expressing it fully. The most unforgettable connections form between individuals who have each done the work of becoming themselves. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, Jung stated. This becoming isn't a self-centered pursuit, but the prerequisite for genuine relationship. Only as we come to know and accept our authentic nature can we recognize and honor the authentic nature of others. Until then, our connections remain exchanges between personas rather than encounters between souls. This brings us to what might be called Jung's secret to unforgettable connection, the recognition that real intimacy requires relating from the self, Jung's term for the central organizing principle of the psyche that transcends the ego, rather than from the persona or ego alone. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate, Jung wrote. Our unconscious patterns will continue manifesting in our relationships until we bring awareness to them. Consider how this understanding transforms our approach to connection. Rather than focusing primarily on techniques for making good impressions or managing others' perceptions, Jung would direct our attention inward, to the relationship we've established with our own depths. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being, he wrote. This kindling happens most powerfully in relationship, but only when we bring our inner light rather than seeking it exclusively from others. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases, Jung observed. This insight applies profoundly to human connection. There is no universal formula for creating unforgettable relationships because authentic connection emerges from the unique constellation of each individual psyche. What works isn't technique, but presence, the capacity to be fully ourselves while allowing others the same freedom. Jung recognized that this approach to connection asks more of us than conventional social strategies. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become, he wrote. This choosing includes how we relate to others, whether we use them as escape from ourselves or engage with them from the ground of self-knowledge. The former creates dependency masquerading as connection. The latter creates the possibility for what Jung called individuation in relationship, mutual growth through authentic encounter. When Jung stated that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, he was identifying both the greatest obstacle to authentic connection and its essential prerequisite. Most people approach relationships seeking validation for the acceptable parts of themselves while hiding what they deem unacceptable. This strategy dooms connection before it begins, creating relationships based on partial truths that cannot bear the weight of full recognition. Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event, Jung observed. The parts of ourselves we cannot accept don't disappear from our relationships. They manifest as projections, conflicts, and recurring patterns. The person who cannot acknowledge their own neediness will find themselves surrounded by needy others. The one who denies their aggression will attract aggressive partners. These aren't coincidences, but compensations, the psyche's attempt to bring attention to what consciousness refuses to acknowledge. This understanding reveals why some connections feel so electric. They activate unconscious content, bringing to awareness aspects of ourselves we haven't yet integrated. The reason for evil in the world is that people are not able to tell their stories, Jung wrote. When connection creates space for previously untold stories to emerge, it becomes not just memorable, but transformative, changing how we understand both ourselves and the possibility of relationship itself. Jung identified another crucial element of unforgettable connection in his concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by conventional causality. Synchronicity reveals the meaningful connection between the subjective and objective world, he wrote. When we approach relationships with awareness of the subtle interplay between inner and outer reality, we become attuned to connections that transcend rational explanation, creating experiences of meaning that words can hardly capture. These synchronistic connections often emerge when we're living from our authentic center, rather than our adapted persona. The highest, most decisive experience is to be alone with one's own self, Jung observed. This encounter changes not just how we see ourselves, but how we experience others. no longer as objects for our use or satisfaction, but as mysteries to be encountered on their own terms. The unforgettable quality of such connections stems precisely from their recognition of the inherent dignity and depth of each participant. The pendulum of the mind alternates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong, Jung noted. This acceptance of paradox and ambiguity creates relationships where neither person must be diminished for the other to be affirmed. Both can exist in their fullness, including their contradictions and complexities. This mutual recognition of wholeness, not perfection but completeness, generates connections that continue to develop rather than stagnating or collapsing when the initial projection fades. Perhaps most fundamentally, Jung understood that authentic connection has a spiritual dimension, not in any dogmatic sense, but in the recognition of something that transcends individual consciousness. The gods have become diseases, Jung wrote, meaning that the archetypal energies previously expressed through mythology now manifest through our psychological patterns. When we relate to others with awareness of these deeper dimensions, our connections tap into currents of meaning that extend beyond personal history or preference. "Show me a sane man and I will cure him for you," Jung famously quipped. This seemingly flippant remark contains a profound truth about connection. Conventional sanity often involves such complete adaptation to collective norms that individual authenticity is sacrificed. The most unforgettable connections often break these conventional bounds, creating relationships that might appear unusual from the outside, but contain extraordinary depth and meaning for those involved. This understanding transforms how we might approach the quest for meaningful connection. Rather than accumulating techniques or strategies, Jung would direct us toward self-knowledge, toward recognizing and integrating the disparate aspects of our own psyche. The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego, he noted. As we surrender our rigid ego identifications, our external relationships naturally reflect greater coherence and authenticity. We cannot change anything until we accept it, Jung emphasized. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. This principle applies powerfully to connection. We cannot change the quality of our relationships until we accept their current reality, including our own contributions to their limitations. This acceptance isn't resignation, but the beginning of transformation, the necessary ground from which authentic change becomes possible. For Jung, this transformation wasn't merely personal, but collective. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, he wrote. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner contradictions, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposite halves. Our capacity for authentic connection doesn't just enhance our individual lives, but contributes to healing the broader cultural divisions that reflect our internal fragmentation. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to one, or from holding certain views which others find inadmissible, Jung observed. True connection transcends mere presence, creating spaces where authentic communication becomes possible, where what matters most can be spoken without fear of rejection or misunderstanding. These connections remain unforgettable precisely because they allow us to be known in ways that ordinary interaction rarely permits. Jung's approach to connection ultimately transcends technique or strategy, pointing instead toward a quality of being. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. The unforgettable connections Jung describes aren't manufactured through social skill, but emerge naturally from the internal work of becoming whole, of integrating shadow and light into a coherent selfhood capable of authentic recognition. When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you, Jung observed. This authenticity isn't just a theoretical ideal, but a lived reality. The connections that change us, that remain in our memory as touchstones of authentic meeting, are those where something essential in each person is recognized and affirmed by the other. Not the persona, not the adapted self, but the deeper nature that Jung called the self. This is the secret Jung discovered about unforgettable connections. They aren't found primarily through what we do, but through who we become, through the courage to know ourselves completely and the willingness to be known in that completeness. The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you, Jung cautioned. In discovering our own answer to this question lies the foundation for connections that don't merely pass through our lives, but transform them. Encounters that continue to reverberate within us long after they've ended. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms, Jung remarked. In that transformation lies the foundation for connections that don't merely pass through our lives, but profoundly change them. Encounters that continue to reverberate within us long after they've ended. The unforgettable connections Jung describes aren't reserved for the privileged few, but are available to anyone willing to undertake the journey of self-knowledge. They emerge not from extraordinary circumstances, but from extraordinary presence, from the capacity to be fully ourselves, while creating space for others to do the same. In this mutual recognition lies the secret Jung discovered, that the most profound connections form not between personas, but between souls who have each done the courageous work of becoming who they truly are.